When Darnell Jameson found himself in the hands of the police, no one knew who he truly was. But his father was the police commissioner, and that moment changed everything. How he responded to this injustice would shock even the most seasoned. But let's begin at the very start. Darnell Jameson always felt free skating down the streets and sidewalks of his neighborhood. It was his way of escaping, of getting away from the noise of the city and the expectations that had been placed on him since childhood, simply for being the son of the police commissioner. On this hot summer day, he was once again in the park, a familiar place where he could be himself, where he wasn't judged or forced to meet someone else's standards. He skated down the concrete path, feeling the lightness and confidence under the grip of his skateboard. There were no crimes, no disturbances, just a teenager enjoying the moment. But someone was watching. Through the window of a nearby house, Martin, an elderly white man, curled up in his chair, watching Darnell skate by his home. In Martin's eyes, the boy on the skateboard seemed suspicious. Martin was sure something was wrong. Someone needed to be watching. This is no place for a teenager, especially not one like him, he thought, grabbing his phone. Martin dialed 911 and whispered to the operator. "I see a suspicious black teenager in the park. He's skating on the sidewalk, and I think it's not safe. Maybe he's up to something." Less than 10 minutes later, a patrol car arrived at the park. Darnell, who hadn't expected anything out of the ordinary, continued to skate, enjoying his freedom. He was certain the police wouldn't pay him any attention. Just another day, just another skateboard, and no laws being broken. But he was wrong. The police car stopped right by the park, and 2 officers in uniform got out. They walked directly towards Darnell, ignoring the other people nearby or the fact that there was no apparent violation. One officer, noticeably younger than the other, approached Darnell and stopped him. "Did you just skate on the sidewalk?" the senior officer asked, his voice sharp with suspicion. Darnell froze for a second but quickly regained his composure. "I'm just skating, sir," he replied, trying to stay calm. But the officer didn't ease up. He looked down on him, as if he wasn't a teenager, but some kind of dangerous element. "You have the right to skateboard, but not here on the sidewalk. Where are your papers?" he demanded, not taking his eyes off Darnell. Darnell felt his heart racing. He knew the reason he was being treated with suspicion had nothing to do with breaking the law. It was simply because of who he was, a black boy. Not because of anything he did, but because people like Martin couldn't see anything in him but a threat. "That's not exactly true. I was skating carefully. I haven't broken any rules," Darnell answered, but his voice trembled. The officers continued to stand around him, and the tension grew. Darnell felt his fists clench, but he couldn't back down. He was in the park, and he knew he didn't have to leave. At that moment, as one of the officers began to pull out a tablet to record his details, Darnell felt his hand move toward his pocket for his phone. He didn't want this moment to be forgotten. He didn't want people to believe the false stories about black teens causing problems. He dialed his father's number, not expecting him to pick up immediately. "Dad, they're detaining me. They say I broke some rules." At that moment, in the background of the conversation, one of the officers raised his eyebrows. "Who are you?" he asked sharply when he noticed that Darnell seemed to be worried. Darnell barely managed to respond when his father's call came through. When Derek Jameson received the call from his son, his heart sank. Darnell's voice was frantic, and he quickly said, "Dad, they're detaining me. I was just skating, and they don't believe me." Derek wasted no time. He jumped in his car and drove straight to the park. While Darnell stood surrounded by police, the tension continued to rise. The officers demanded his documents, insisting he had broken rules, even though no rules had been broken. He knew the problem wasn't his skating, it was who he was. A black teenager on a skateboard was already suspicious to the locals. As soon as Derek arrived, the atmosphere in the park shifted dramatically. The officers froze as they noticed him in uniform. "What's going on here?" Derek asked, looking at the officers with clear displeasure. The officers began to stammer, but Derek didn't let them continue. "My son hasn't broken any law. Why are you detaining him?" His voice firm and authoritative. The officers grew nervous. The younger officer tried to explain that Darnell was skating on the sidewalk, but the senior officer fell silent under Derek's gaze. "Show me where it says you can't skate on the sidewalk," Derek demanded. The officers fell silent, realizing they had made a mistake. Darnell stood nearby, feeling the stares of bystanders filming the scene. His heart raced, knowing this incident would be discussed everywhere. Derek didn't let them off the hook. "If you want this to become public knowledge, I can call my deputy." The younger officer, flustered, put away the tablet. The senior officer admitted their mistake, but it was clear. The pressure of public opinion and Derek's authority made them retreat. Darnell felt a sense of relief, but knew the situation wasn't over. When the police finally stepped back, Darnell felt relieved, but he was still tense. People in the park continued to watch, some filming the events on their phones. Derek stood beside him, watching the officers, who seemed to be preparing to offer an explanation, but instead stayed silent. "We'll talk again," Derek said, throwing a final look at the officers. He knew they had to act fast. Martin, the neighbor who had called the police, had been standing nearby all this time, hoping his complaint would have an impact. When he saw the officers leave, his face flushed with shame, but he still couldn't stop himself. He didn't realize the consequences of his actions. He glanced at Darnell again, and with a tense face, started to head toward his car. "You shouldn't be skating here," he muttered, barely whispering to himself. "These kids always cause problems." Derek turned, and not allowing him to continue, walked straight up to Martin. "Are you serious?" His voice cold, eyes flashing with intensity. "You're saying my son, who hasn't broken a single law, is a threat?" Martin felt his face go pale. He tried to defend himself, but he quickly realized he wasn't facing just a cop, but the commissioner, a man who controlled the entire system. Words failed him. I just wanted them not to break the rules," Martin muttered, struggling to find an excuse. "You were wrong," Derek said, "and now you'll have to answer for it." Soon, another police car pulled up, and journalists arrived at the scene. The incident quickly became a topic of local media. Public opinion began to intensify. The story of how Darnell, the commissioner's son, was detained because of bias quickly caught the attention of the city. As the story unfolded on social media, new details emerged. Interviews with witnesses, photos of the officers, statements from locals. People began speaking out against racism and bias. Within hours, Darnell was at the center of attention. Despite the unpleasant experience, he felt supported. People's views were changing, and he knew this was a significant event not just for him, but for society as a whole. When Derek returned to the station, his deputy already knew about everything. That evening, before a press meeting, he wrote a statement announcing an official investigation into the incident. Derek knew that this case would serve as a catalyst for serious change, but despite the pressure, he was resolute. "We won't allow this to become the norm. We need to change the system so this doesn't happen again," he told his deputy, preparing for the public statement. Darnell stood next to his father, watching him become a symbol of the fight against racism. For him, this wasn't just a personal experience but a lesson that made him think about the future. The story of Darnell's detainment quickly spread throughout the city, drawing attention not only from locals, but also from the media. Public opinion was divided. Many supported the commissioner, seeing the incident as a clear example of racial bias in the police, while others questioned the officer's actions. Understanding the significance of this moment, Derek arranged a press conference. "This isn't a mistake. It's a problem with the system," he said. "My son shouldn't have gone through this, and we're going to change this system." An independent investigation was soon launched, and the officers who detained Darnell faced disciplinary action. Martin, who had called the police, was forced to apologize to the Jameson family. His behavior became a topic of discussion in the media and at city meetings. Darnell, despite the initial stress, realized that his father's position and the public's attention had made a difference. His life would forever be affected by this incident, but in a way that changed his future path. This wasn't just about skateboards and sidewalks anymore. It was about freedom and the fight for fairness. He knew the story would continue, but at least he had learned how to stand strong and make the difference.